Story 81 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Kurt from Tucson, Arizona. Household Tales by Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm and translated by Margaret Hunt. Brother Lustig. There was on a time a great war, and when it came to an end many soldiers were discharged. Then Brother Lustig also received his dismissal, and besides that nothing but a small loaf of contract bread, and 4 kreutzers in money, with which he departed. St. Peter had, however, placed himself in his way in the shape of a poor beggar, and when Brother Lustig came up, he begged alms of him. Brother Lustig replied, "Dear beggar man, what am I to give you? I have been a soldier, and have received my dismissal, and have nothing but this little loaf of contract bread, and 4 kreutzers of money. When that is gone, I shall have to beg as well as you. Still, I will give you something." Thereupon he divided the loaf into 4 parts, and gave the apostle one of them, and a kreutzer likewise. St. Peter thanked him, went onwards, and threw himself again in the soldier's way as a beggar, but in another shape, and when he came up, begged a gift of him as before. Brother Lustig spoke as he had done before, and again gave him a quarter of the loaf and 1 kreutzer. St. Peter thanked him, and went onwards, but for the 3rd time placed himself in another shape as a beggar on the road, and spoke to Brother Lustig. Brother Lustig gave him also the 3rd quarter of bread and the 3rd kreutzer. St. Peter thanked him, and Brother Lustig went onwards, and had but a quarter of the loaf and 1 kreutzer. With that he went into an inn, ate the bread, and ordered 1 kreutzer's worth of beer. When he had had it, he journeyed onwards, and then St. Peter, who had assumed the appearance of a discharged soldier, met and spoke to him thus: "Good day, comrade. Canst thou not give me a bit of bread and a kreutzer to get a drink?" "Where am I to procure it?" answered Brother Lustig. "I have been discharged, and I got nothing but a loaf of ammunition bread, and 4 kreutzers in money. I met 3 beggars on the road, and I gave each of them a quarter of my bread and 1 kreutzer. The last quarter I ate in the inn, and had a drink with the last kreutzer. Now my pockets are empty, and if thou also hast nothing, we can go a-begging together." "No," answered St. Peter, "we need not quite do that. I know a little about medicine, and I will soon earn as much as I require by that." "Indeed," said Brother Lustig, "I know nothing of that, so I must go and beg alone." "Just come with me," said St. Peter, "and if I earn anything, thou shalt have half of it." "All right," said Brother Lustig, so they went away together. Then they came to a peasant's house, inside which they heard loud lamentations and cries, so they went in, and there the husband was lying sick unto death, and very near his end, and his wife was crying and weeping quite loudly. "Stop that howling and crying," said St. Peter, "I will make the man well again." And he took a salve out of his pocket, and healed the sick man in a moment, so that he could get up, and was in perfect health. In great delight the man and his wife said, "How can we reward you? What shall we give you?" But St. Peter would take nothing, and the more the peasant folks offered him, the more he refused. Brother Lustig, however, nudged St. Peter and said, "Take something, sure enough we are in need of it." At length the woman brought a lamb, and said to St. Peter that he really must take that, but he would not. Then Brother Lustig gave him a poke in the side, and said, "Do take it, you stupid fool, we are in great want of it." Then St. Peter said at last, "Well, I will take the lamb, but I won't carry it. If thou wilt insist on having it, thou must carry it." "That is nothing," said Brother Lustig, "I will easily carry it," and took it on his shoulder. Then they departed, and came to a wood, But Brother Lustig had begun to feel the lamb heavy, and he was hungry, so he said to St. Peter, "Look, that's a good place, we might cook the lamb there and eat it." "As you like," answered St. Peter, "but I can't have anything to do with the cooking. If thou wilt cook, there is a kettle for thee, and in the meantime I will walk about a little until it is ready. Thou must, however, not begin to eat until I have come back. I will come at the right time." "Well, go then," said Brother Lustig. "I understand cookery, I will manage it." Then St. Peter went away, and Brother Lustig killed the lamb, lighted a fire, threw the meat into the kettle, and boiled it. The lamb was, however, quite ready, and the Apostle Peter had not come back. So Brother Lustig took it out of the kettle, cut it up, and found the heart. "That is said to be the best part," said he, and tasted it, but at last he ate it all up. At length St. Peter returned and said, "Thou mayst eat the whole of the lamb thyself. I will only have the heart, give me that." Then Brother Lustig took a knife and fork and pretended to look anxiously about amongst the lamb's flesh, but not to be able to find the heart, and at last he said abruptly, "There's none here." "But where can it be?" said the apostle. "I don't know," replied Brother Lustig, "but look, what fools we both are to seek for the lamb's heart, and neither of us to remember that a lamb has no heart." "Oh," said St. Peter, "that is something quite new. Every animal has a heart. Why is a lamb to have none?" "No, be assured, my brother," said Brother Lustig, "that a lamb has no heart. Just consider it seriously, and then you will see that it really has none." "Well, it is all right," said St. Peter, "if there's no heart, then I want none of the lamb, thou mayst eat it alone." "What I can't eat now I will carry away in my knapsack," said Brother Lustig, and he ate half the lamb and put the rest in his knapsack. They went farther, and then St. Peter caused a great stream of water to flow right across their path, and they were obliged to pass through it. Said St. Peter, "Do thou go first." "No," answered Brother Lustig, "thou must go first." And he thought, "If the water is too deep, I will stay behind." Then St. Peter strode through it, and the water just reached to his knee. So Brother Lustig began to go through also, but the water grew deeper and reached his throat. Then he cried, "Brother, help me!" St. Peter said, "Then wilt thou confess that thou hast eaten the lamb's heart?" "No," said he, "I have not eaten it." Then the water grew deeper still and rose to his mouth. "Help me, brother!" cried the soldier. St. Peter said, "Then wilt thou confess that thou hast eaten the lamb's heart?" "No," he replied, "I have not eaten it." St. Peter, however, would not let him be drowned, but made the water sink, and helped him through it. Then they journeyed onwards, and came to a kingdom where they heard that the king's daughter lay sick unto death. "Hullo, brother," said the soldier to St. Peter, "this is a chance for us. If we can heal her, we shall be provided for life." But St. Peter was not half quick enough for him. "Come, lift your legs, my dear brother," said he, "that we may get there in time." But St. Peter walked slower and slower, though Brother Lustig did all he could to drive and push him on, and at last they heard that the princess was dead. "Now we're done for," said Brother Lustig, "that comes of thy sleepy way of walking." "Just be quiet," answered St. Peter, "I can do more than cure sick people. I can bring dead ones to life again." "Well, if thou canst do that," said Brother Lustig, "it's all right, but thou shouldst earn at least half the kingdom for us by that." Then they went to the royal palace, where every one was in great grief, but St. Peter told the king that he would restore his daughter to life. He was taken to her, and said, "Bring me a kettle and some water." And when that was brought, he bade every one go out, and allowed no one to remain with him but Brother Lustig. Then he cut off all the dead girl's limbs and threw them in the water, lighted a fire beneath the kettle, and boiled them. And when the flesh had fallen away from the bones, he took out the beautiful white bones, and laid them on a table, and arranged them together in their natural order. When he had done that, he stepped forward and said 3 times, In the name of the Holy Trinity, dead woman, arise!" And at the third time the princess arose, living, healthy, and beautiful. Then the king was in the greatest joy, and said to St. Peter, "Ask for thy reward. Even if it were half my kingdom, I would give it to thee." But St. Peter said, "I want nothing for it." "O thou tomfool," thought Brother Lustig to himself, and nudged his comrade's side, and said, "Don't be so stupid. If thou hast no need of anything, I have." St. Peter, however, would have nothing, but as the king saw that the other would very much like to have something, he ordered his treasurer to fill Brother Lustig's knapsack with gold. Then they went on their way, and when they came to a forest, St. Peter said to Brother Lustig, "Now we will divide the gold." "Yes," he replied, "we will." So St. Peter divided the gold, and divided it into 3 heaps. Brother Lustig thought to himself, "What craze has he got in his head now? He is making 3 shares, and there are only 2 of us." But St. Peter said, "I have divided it exactly. There is 1 share for me, 1 share for thee, and 1 for him who ate the lamb's heart." "Oh, I ate that," replied Brother Lustig, and hastily swept up the gold. "You may trust what I say." "But how can that be true," said St. Peter, "when a lamb has no heart?" What, brother, what can you be thinking of? Lambs have hearts like other animals, why should only they have none?" "Well, so be it," said St. Peter, "keep the gold to yourself, but I will stay with you no longer. I will go my way alone." "As you like, dear brother," answered Brother Lustig. "Farewell." Then St. Peter went a different road, but Brother Lustig thought, "It is a good thing that he has taken himself off. He is certainly a strange saint after all." Then he had money enough, but did not know how to manage it, squandered it, gave it away, and when some time had gone by, once more had nothing. Then he arrived in a certain country where he heard that a king's daughter was dead. "Oh," thought he, "that may be a good thing for me. I will bring her to life again, and see that I am paid as ought to be." So he went to the king and offered to raise the dead girl to life again. Now the king had heard that a discharged soldier was traveling about and bringing dead persons to life again, and thought that Brother Lustig was the man. But as he had no confidence in him, he consulted his counselors first, who said that he might give it a trial, as his daughter was dead. Then Brother Lustig ordered water to be brought to him in a kettle, bade every one go out, cut the limbs off, threw them in the water, and lighted a fire beneath, just as he had seen St. Peter do. The water began to boil, the flesh fell off, and then he took the bones out and laid them on the table, but he did not know the order in which to lay them, and placed them all wrong and in confusion. Then he stood before them and said, "In the name of the most holy Trinity, dead maiden, I bid thee arise." And he said this thrice, but the bones did not stir. So he said it thrice more, but also in vain. "Confounded girl that you are, get up," cried he, "get up, or it shall be worse for you." When he had said that, St. Peter suddenly appeared in his former shape as a discharged soldier. He entered by the window and said, "Godless man, what art thou doing? How can the dead maiden arise when thou hast thrown about her bones in such confusion?" "Dear brother, I have done everything to the best of my ability," he answered. "This once I will help thee out of thy difficulty. But one thing I tell thee, and that is that if thou undertakest anything of the kind again, it will be the worse for thee, and also that thou must neither demand nor accept the smallest thing from the king for this." Thereupon St. Peter laid the bones in their right order, said to the maiden 3 times, "In the name of the most holy Trinity, dead maiden, arise!" And the king's daughter arose, healthy and beautiful as before. Then St. Peter went away again by the window, and Brother Lustig was rejoiced to find that all had passed off so well, but was very much vexed to think that after all he was not to take anything for it. "I should just like to know," thought he, "what fancy that fellow has got in his head, for what he gives with one hand he takes away with the other. There's no sense whatever in it." Then the king offered Brother Lustig whatsoever he wished to have, but he did not dare to take anything. However, by hints and cunning, he contrived to make the king order his knapsack to be filled with gold for him, and with that he departed. When he got out, St. Peter was standing by the door, and said, "Just look what a man thou art! Did I not forbid thee to take anything, and there thou hast thy knapsack full of gold?" "How can I help that?" answered Brother Lustig, "if people will put it in for me? Well, I tell thee this, that if ever thou settest about anything of this kind again, thou shalt suffer for it." "Brother, have no fear, now I have money, why should I trouble myself with washing bones?" "Faith," said St. Peter, "the gold will last a long time. In order that after this thou mayst never tread in forbidden paths, I will bestow on thy knapsack this property, namely, that whatsoever thou wishest to have inside it shall be there. Farewell, thou wilt now never see me more." "Goodbye," said Brother Lustig, and thought to himself, "I am very glad that thou hast taken thyself off, thou strange fellow. I shall certainly not follow thee." But of the magical power which had bestowed on his knapsack he thought no more. Brother Lustig travelled about with his money, and squandered and wasted what he had as before. When at last he had no more than 4 kreutzers, he passed by an inn and thought, the money must go, and ordered 3 kreutzers worth of wine and 1 kreutzer's worth of bread for himself. As he was sitting there drinking, the smell of roast goose made its way to his nose. Brother Lustig looked about and peeped, and saw that the host had 2 geese standing in the oven. Then he remembered that his comrade had said that whatsoever he wished to have in his knapsack should be there. So he said, "Oh, I must try that with the geese." So he went out, and when he was outside the door, he said, "I wish those 2 roasted geese out of the oven and in my knapsack." And when he had said that, he unbuckled it and looked in, and there they were inside it. "Ah, that's right," said he, "now I am a made man," and went away to a meadow and took out the roast meat. When he was in the midst of his meal, 2 journeymen came up and looked at the second goose, which was not yet touched, with hungry eyes. Brother Lustig thought to himself, "One is enough for me," and called the 2 men up and said, "Take the goose and eat it to my health." They thanked him, and went with it to the inn, ordered themselves a half bottle of wine and a loaf, and took out the goose which had been given them, and began to eat. The hostess saw them and said to her husband, "Those 2 are eating a goose. Just look and see if it is not one of ours out of the oven." The landlord ran thither, and behold, the oven was empty. "What!" cried he, "you thievish crew, you want to eat goose as cheap as that? Pay for it this moment, or I will wash you well with green hazel sap." The 2 said, "We are no thieves. A discharged soldier gave us the goose outside there in the meadow." "You shall not throw dust in my eyes that way. The soldier was here, but he went out by the door like an honest fellow. I looked after him myself. You are the thieves, and shall pay." But as they could not pay, he took a stick and cudgeled them out of the house. Brother Lustig went his way, and came to a place where there was a magnificent castle, and not far from it a wretched inn. He went to the inn and asked for a night's lodging, but the landlord turned him away and said, "There is no more room here, the house is full of noble guests." "It surprises me that they should come to you, and not go to that splendid castle," said Brother Lustig. "Ah, indeed," replied the host, "but it is no slight matter to sleep there for a night. No one who has tried it so far has ever come out of it alive." "If others have tried it," said Brother Lustig, "I will try it too." "Leave it alone," said the host, "it will cost you your neck." "It won't kill me at once," said Brother Lustig, "just give me the key and some good food and wine." So the host gave him the key and food and wine, and with this Brother Lustig went into the castle, enjoyed his supper, and at length, as he was sleepy, he lay down on the ground, for there was no bed. He soon fell asleep, but during the night was disturbed by a great noise, and when he awoke he saw 9 ugly devils in the room, who had made a circle, and were dancing around him. Brother Lustig said, "Well, dance as long as you like, but none of you must come too close." but the devils pressed continually nearer to him, and almost stepped on his face with their hideous feet. "Stop, you devil's ghosts," said he, but they behaved still worse. Then Brother Lustig grew angry, and cried, "Hola! but I will soon make it quiet," and got the leg of a chair, and struck out into the midst of them with it. But 9 devils against 1 soldier were still too many, and when he struck those in front of him, the others seized him behind by the hair, and tore it unmercifully. "Devil's crew," cried he, "it is getting too bad, but wait. Into my knapsack, all 9 of you." In an instant they were in it, and then he buckled it up and threw it into a corner. After this all was suddenly quiet, and Brother Lustig lay down again, and slept till it was bright day. Then came the innkeeper and the nobleman to whom the castle belonged to see how he had fared. But when they perceived that he was merry and well, they were astonished, and asked, "Have the spirits done you no harm then?" "The reason why they have not," answered Brother Lustig, "is because I have got the whole 9 of them in my knapsack. You may once more inhabit your castle quite tranquilly. None of them will ever haunt it again." The nobleman thanked him, made him rich presents, and begged him to remain in his service, and he would provide for him as long as he lived. "No," replied Brother Lustig, "I am used to wandering about, I will travel farther." Then he went away and entered into a smithy, laid the knapsack which contained the 9 devils on the anvil, and asked the smith and his apprentices to strike it. So they smote with their great hammers with all their strength, and the devils uttered howls which were quite pitiable. When he opened the knapsack after this, 8 of them were dead, but one which had been lying in a fold of it was still alive, slipped out, and went back again to hell. Thereupon Brother Lustig travelled a long time about the world, and those who know them can tell many a story about him, but at last he grew old, and thought of his end. So he went to a hermit who was known to be a pious man, and said to him, "I am tired of wandering about, and want now to behave in such a manner that I shall enter into the kingdom of heaven." The hermit replied, "There are 2 roads. One is broad and pleasant, and leads to hell. The other is narrow and rough, and leads to heaven." "I should be a fool," thought Brother Lustig, "if I were to take the narrow rough road." So he set out and took the broad and pleasant road, and at length came to a great black door, which was the door of hell. Brother Lustig knocked, and the doorkeeper peeped out to see who was there. But when he saw Brother Lustig, he was terrified, for he was the very same 9th devil who had been shut up in the knapsack, and had escaped from it with a black eye. So he pushed the bolt in again as quickly as he could, ran to the devil's lieutenant, and said, "There is a fellow outside with a knapsack who wants to come in, but as you value your lives, don't allow him to enter, or he will wish the whole of hell into his knapsack. He once gave me a frightful hammering when I was inside it." So they called out to Brother Lustig that he was to go away again, for he should not get in there. "If they won't have me here," thought he, "I will see if I can find a place for myself in heaven, for I must be somewhere." So he turned about and went onwards until he came to the door of heaven, where he knocked. St. Peter was sitting hard by as doorkeeper. Brother Lustig recognized him at once, and thought, "Here I find an old friend, I shall get on better." But St. Peter said, "I really believe that thou wantest to come into heaven. Let me in, brother, I must get in somewhere. If they would have taken me into hell, I should not have come here." "No," said St. Peter, "thou shalt not enter." "Then if thou wilt not let me in, take thy knapsack back, for I will have nothing at all from thee." "Give it here then," said St. Peter. Then Brother Lustig gave him the knapsack into heaven through the bars, and St. Peter took it, and hung it beside his seat. Then said Brother Lustig, "And now I wish myself inside my knapsack." And in a second he was in it, and in heaven, and St. Peter was forced to let him stay there. End of story 81.
Story 82 of Household Tales. This is the LibriVox recording All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Melvin Lee. Household Tales by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Margaret Hunt. Gambling Hansel. Once upon a time there was a man who did nothing but gamble, and for that reason people never called him anything but Gambling Hansel. And as he never ceased to gamble, he played away his house and all that he had. Now the very day before his creditors were to take his house from him, came the Lord and St. Peter and asked him to give them shelter for the night. Then Gambling Hansel said, "For my part, you may stay the night, but I cannot give you a bed or anything to eat." So the Lord said he was just to take them in, and they themselves would buy something to eat, to which Gambling Hansel made no objection. Thereupon St. Peter gave him 3 groschen, and said he was to go to the baker's and fetch some bread. So Gambling Hansel went, but when he reached the house where the other gambling vagabonds were gathered together, they, although they had won all that he had, greeted him clamorously and said, "Hansel, do come in." "Oh," said he, "do you want to win the 3 groschen too?" On this they would not let him go, so he went in and played with the 3 groschen also. Meanwhile St. Peter and the Lord were waiting, and as he was so long in coming, they set out to meet him. When Gambling Hansel came, however, he pretended that the money had fallen into the gutter, and kept raking about in it all the while to find it. But our Lord already knew that he had lost it in play. St. Peter again gave him 3 groschen, and now he did not allow himself to be led away once more, but fetched them the loaf. Our Lord then inquired if he had no wine, and he said, "Alack, sir, the casks are all empty." But the Lord said he was to go down into the cellar, for the best wine was still there. For a long time he would not believe this, but at length he said, "Well, I will go down, but I know that there is none there." When he turned the tap, however, lo and behold, the best of wine ran out. So he took it to them, and the 2 passed the night there. Early next morning our Lord told Gambling Hansel that he might beg 3 favors. The Lord expected that he would ask to go to heaven, but Gambling Hansel asked for a pack of cards with which he could win everything, for dice with which he would win everything, and for a tree whereon every kind of fruit would grow, and from which no one who had climbed up could descend until he bade him do so. The Lord gave him all that he had asked, and departed with St. Peter. Now Gambling Hansel at once set about gambling in real earnest, and before long he had gained half the world. Upon this St. Peter said to the Lord, "Lord, this thing must not go on. He will win, and thou lose the whole world. We must send Death to him." When Death appeared, Gambling Hansel had just seated himself at the gambling table, and Death said, "Hansel, come out a while." But Gambling Hansel said, "Just wait a little until the game is done, and in the meantime get up into that tree out there and gather a little fruit, that we may have something to munch on our way." Thereupon Death climbed up, but when he wanted to come down again, he could not, and Gambling Hansel left him up there for 7 years, during which time no one died. So St. Peter said to the Lord, "Lord, this thing must not go on. People no longer die. We must go ourselves." And they went themselves, and the Lord commanded Hansel to let Death come down. So Hansel went at once to Death and said to him, "Come down." And Death took him directly and put an end to him. They went away together and came to the next world, and then Gambling Hansel made straight for the door of heaven, and knocked at it. Who is there? Gambling Hansel. Ah, we have nothing to do with him. Begone! So he went to the door of purgatory and knocked once more. Who is there? Gambling Hansel. Ah, there is quite enough weeping and wailing here without him. Then he went to the door of hell, and there they let him in. There was, however, no one at home but old Lucifer and the crooked devils who had just been doing their evil work in the world. And no sooner was Hansel there than he sat down to gamble again. Lucifer, however, had nothing to lose but his misshapen devils, and Gambling Hansel won them from him, as with his cards he could not fail to do. And now he was off again with his crooked devils, and they went to Hohenfroet, and pulled up a hop pole, and with it went to heaven, and began to thrust the pole against it, and heaven began to crack. So again St. Peter said, Lord, this thing cannot go on. We must let him in, or he will throw us down from heaven. And they let him in. But Gambling Hansel instantly began to play again, and there was such a noise and confusion that there was no hearing what they themselves were saying. Therefore St. Peter once more said, Lord, this cannot go on. We must throw him down, or he will make all heaven rebellious. So they went to him at once, and threw him down, and his soul broke into fragments, and went into the gambling vagabonds, who are living there this very day. End of story 82.
Story 83 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eva K. Household Tales by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, translated by Margaret Hunt. Hans in luck. Hans had served his master for 7 years, so he said to him, "Master, my time is up. Now I should be glad to go back home to my mother. Give me my wages." The master answered, "You have served me faithfully and honestly. As the service was, so shall the reward be." And he gave Hans a piece of gold as big as his head. Hans pulled his handkerchief out of his pocket, wrapped up the lump in it, put it on his shoulder, and set out on the way home. As he went on, always putting one foot before the other, he saw a horseman trotting quickly and merrily by on a lively horse. "Ah," said Hans, quite loud, "what a fine thing it is to ride! There you sit as on a chair. You stumble over no stones, you save your shoes, and get on you don't know how." The rider, who had heard him, stopped and called out, "Hollo, Hans! Why do you go on foot then?" "I must," answered he, "for I have this lump to carry home. It is true that it is gold, but I cannot hold my head straight for it, and it hurts my shoulder." "I will tell you what," said the rider, "we will exchange. I will give you my horse, and you can give me your lump." "With all my heart," said Hans, "but I can tell you, you will have to crawl along with it." The rider got down, took the gold, and helped Hans up. Then he gave him the bridle tight in his hands, and said, "If you want to go at a really good pace, you must click your tongue and call out, 'Jup, jup.'" Hans was heartily delighted as he sat upon the horse and rode away so bold and free. After a little while he thought that it ought to go faster, and he began to click with his tongue and call out, "Jup, jup." The horse put himself into a sharp trot, and before Hans knew where he was, he was thrown off and lying in a ditch which separated the field from the highway. The horse would have gone off too, if it had not been stopped by a countryman who was coming along the road and driving a cow before him. Hans got his limbs together and stood up on his legs again, but he was vexed, and said to the countryman, "It is a poor joke, this riding, especially when one gets hold of a mare like this, that kicks and throws one off, so that one has a chance of breaking one's neck. And never again will I mount it. Now, I like your cow, for one can walk quietly behind her, and have, over and above, one's milk, butter, and cheese every day without fail. What would I not give to have such a cow?" "Well," said the countryman, "if it would give you so much pleasure, I do not mind giving the cow for the horse." Hans agreed with the greatest delight. The countryman jumped upon the horse and rode quickly away. Hans drove his cow quietly before him, and thought over his lucky bargain. "If only I have a morsel of bread, and that can hardly fail me, I can eat butter and cheese with it as often as I like. If I'm thirsty, I can milk my cow and drink the milk. Good heart, what more can I want?" When he came to an inn, he made a halt, and in his great content ate up what he had with him, his dinner and supper, and all he had, and with his last few farthings had half a glass of beer. Then he drove his cow onwards along the road to his mother's village. As it drew nearer midday, the heat was more oppressive, and Hans found himself upon a moor which it took about an hour to cross. He felt it very hot, and his tongue clave to the roof of his mouth with thirst. "I can find a cure for this," thought Hans. "I will milk the cow now, and refresh myself with the milk." He tied her to a withered tree, and as he had no pail, he put his leather cap underneath, but try as he would, not a drop of milk came, and as he set himself to work in a clumsy way, the impatient beast at last gave him such a blow on his head with its hind foot that he fell on the ground, and for a long time could not think where he was. By good fortune a butcher just then came along the road, with a wheelbarrow in which lay a young pig. "What sort of a trick is this?" cried he, and helped the good Hans up. Hans told him what had happened. The butcher gave him his flask and said, "Take a drink and refresh yourself. The cow will certainly give no milk. It is an old beast. At the best it is only fit for the plough or for the butcher." "Well, well," said Hans, as he stroked his hair down on his head. "Who would have thought it? Certainly it is a fine thing when one can kill a beast like that at home. What meat one has! But I do not care much for beef. It is not juicy enough for me. A young pig like that now is the thing to have. It tastes quite different, and then there are the sausages." "Hark here, Hans," said the butcher. "Out of love for you I will exchange, and will let you have the pig for the cow." "Heaven repay you for your kindness," said Hans, as he gave up the cow, whilst the pig was unbound from the barrow, and the cord by which it was tied was put in his hand. Hans went on, and thought to himself how everything was going just as he wished. If he did meet with any vexation, it was immediately set right. Presently there joined him a lad who was carrying a fine white goose under his arm. They said good morning to each other, and Hans began to tell of his good luck and how he had always made such good bargains. The boy told him that he was taking the goose to a christening feast. "Just lift her," added he, and laid hold of her by the wings. "How heavy she is! She has been fattened up for the last 8 weeks. Whoever has a bit of her when she is roasted will have to wipe the fat from both sides of his mouth." "Yes," said Hans, as he weighed her in one hand, "she is a good weight, but my pig is no bad one." Meanwhile the lad looked suspiciously from one side to the other and shook his head. "Look here," he said at length, "it may not be all right with your pig. In the village through which I passed, the mayor himself had just had one stolen out of its sty. I fear that you have got hold of it there. They have sent out some people, and it would be a bad business if they caught you with the pig. At the very least you would be shut up in the dark hole." The good Hans was terrified. "Goodness," he said, "help me out of this fix. You know more about this place than I do. Take my pig, and leave me your goose." "I shall risk something at that game," answered the lad, "but I will not be the cause of your getting into trouble." So he took the cord in his hand and drove away the pig quickly along a by-path. The good Hans, free from care, went homewards with the goose under his arm. "When I think over it properly," said he to himself, "I have even gained by the exchange. First there is the good roast meat, then the quantity of fat which will drip from it, and which will give me dripping for my bread for a quarter of a year, and lastly the beautiful white feathers. I will have my pillow stuffed with them, and then indeed I shall go to sleep without rocking. How glad my mother will be!" As he was going through the last village, there stood a scissors grinder with his barrow. As his wheel whirred, he sang, "I sharpen scissors and quickly grind, my coat blows out in the wind behind." Hans stood still and looked at him. At last he spoke to him and said, "All's well with you, as you are so merry with your grinding." "Yes," answered the scissors grinder, "the trade has golden foundation. A real grinder is a man who, as often as he puts his hand into his pocket, finds gold in it. But where did you buy that fine goose?" "I did not buy it, but exchanged my pig for it." "And the pig?" "That I got for a cow." "And the cow?" "I took that instead of a horse." "And the horse?" "For that I gave a lump of gold as big as my head." "And the gold?" "Well, that was my wages for 7 years' service." "You have known how to look after yourself each time," said the grinder. "If you can only get on so far as to hear the money jingle in your pocket whenever you stand up, you will have made your fortune." "How shall I manage that?" said Hans. "You must be a grinder, as I am. Nothing particular is wanted for it but a grindstone. The rest finds itself. I have one here. It is certainly a little worn, but you need not give me anything for it but your goose. Will you do it?" "How can you ask?" answered Hans. "I shall be the luckiest fellow on earth. If I have money whenever I put my hand in my pocket, what need I trouble about any longer?" And he handed him the goose, and received the grindstone in exchange. "Now," said the grinder, as he took up an ordinary heavy stone that lay by him, "here is a strong stone for you into the bargain. You can hammer well upon it, and straighten your old nails. Take it with you, and keep it carefully." Hans loaded himself with the stones, and went on with a contented heart. His eyes shone with joy. "I must have been born with a caul," he cried. "Everything I want happens to me, just as if I were a Sunday child." Meanwhile, as he had been on his legs since daybreak, he began to feel tired. Hunger also tormented him, for in his joy at the bargain by which he got the cow, he had eaten up all his store of food at once. At last he could only go on with great trouble, and was forced to stop every minute. The stones, too, weighed him down dreadfully. Then he could not help thinking how nice it would be if he had not to carry them just then. He crept like a snail to a well in a field, and there he thought that he would rest and refresh himself with a cool draught of water, but in order that he might not injure the stones in sitting down, he laid them carefully by his side on the edge of the well. Then he sat down on it, and was to stoop and drink, when he made a slip, pushed against the stones, and both of them fell into the water. When Hans saw them with his own eyes sinking to the bottom, he jumped for joy, and then knelt down, and with tears in his eyes thanked God for having shown him this favour also, and delivered him in so good a way, and without his having any need to reproach himself from those heavy stones, which had been the only things that troubled him. "There is no man under the sun so fortunate as I," he cried out. With a light heart, and free from every burden, he now ran on until he was with his mother at home. End of story 83.
Story 84 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by J. Kyle Sullivan. Household Tales by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Margaret Hunt. Hans married. There was once upon a time a young peasant named Hans, whose uncle wanted to find him a rich wife. He therefore seated Hans behind the stove, and had it made very hot. Then he fetched a pot of milk and plenty of white bread, gave him a bright newly coined farthing in his hand, and said, "Hans, hold that farthing fast. Crumble the white bread into the milk, and stay where you are, and do not stir from that spot till I come back." "Yes," said Hans, "I will do that." Then the wooer put on a pair of old patched trousers, went to a rich peasant's daughter in the next village, and said, "Won't you marry my nephew Hans? You will get an honest and sensible man who will suit you." The covetous father asked, "How is it with regard to his means? Has he bread to break?" "Dear friend," replied the wooer, "my young nephew has a snug berth, a nice bit of money in hand, and plenty of bread to break. Besides, he has quite as many patches as I have." And as he spoke, he slapped the patches on his trousers, but in that district small pieces of land were called patches also. "If you will give yourself the trouble to go home with me, you shall see at once that all is as I have said." Then the miser did not want to lose this good opportunity, and said, "If that is the case, I have nothing further to say against the marriage." So the wedding was celebrated on the appointed day, and when the young wife went out of doors to see the bridegroom's property, Hans took off his Sunday coat and put on his patched smock frock, and said, "I might spoil my good coat." Then together they went out, and wherever a boundary line came in sight, or fields and meadows were divided from each other, Hans pointed with his finger, and then slapped either a large or small patch on his smock frock, and said, "That patch is mine, and that too, my dearest. Just look at it," meaning thereby that his wife should not stare at the broad land, but look at his garment, which was his own. "Were you indeed at the wedding?" "Yes, indeed I was there, and in full dress. My head dress was of snow, then the sun came out, and it was melted. My coat was of cobwebs, and I had to pass by some thorns, which tore it off me. My shoes were of glass, and I pushed against a stone, and they said, 'Clink,' and broke in two." End of story 84.
Story 85 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Thomas Peter. Household Tales by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Margaret Hunt. The Gold Children. There was once a poor man and a poor woman who had nothing but a little cottage, and who earned their bread by fishing, and always lived from hand to mouth. But it came to pass one day, when the man was sitting by the waterside and casting his net, that he drew out a fish entirely of gold. As he was looking at the fish, full of astonishment, it began to speak, and said, "Hark you, fisherman, if you will throw me back again into the water, I will change your little hut into a splendid castle." Then the fisherman answered, "Of what use is a castle to me if I have nothing to eat?" The goldfish continued, "That shall be taken care of. There will be a cupboard in the castle in which, when you open it, shall be dishes of the most delicate meats, and as many of them as you can desire."
"If that be true," said the man, "then I can well do you a favour."
"Yes," said the fish. "There is, however, the condition that you shall disclose to no one in the world, whosoever he may be, whence your good luck has come. If you speak but one single word, all will be over." Then the man threw the wonderful fish back again into the water, and went home. But where his hovel had formerly stood, now stood a great castle. He opened wide his eyes, entered, and saw his wife dressed in beautiful clothes, sitting in a splendid room, and she was quite delighted, and said, "Husband, how has all this come to pass? It suits me very well."
"Yes," said the man, "it suits me too, but I am frightfully hungry. Just give me something to eat."
Said the wife,
"But I have got nothing, and don't know where to find anything in this new house." "There is no need of your knowing," said the man, "for I see yonder a great cupboard. Just unlock it." When she opened it, there stood cakes, meat, fruit, wine, quite a bright prospect. Then the woman cried joyfully, "What more can you want, my dear?" And they sat down, and ate and drank together. When they had had enough, the woman said, "But, husband, whence come all these riches?" "Alas," answered he, "do not question me about it, for I dare not tell you anything. If I disclose it to any one, then all our good fortune will fly."
"Very good," said she. "If I am not to know anything, then I do not want to know anything." However, she was not in earnest. She never rested day or night, and she goaded her husband until in his impatience he revealed that all was owing to a wonderful golden fish which he had caught, and to which in return he had given its liberty. And as soon as the secret was out, the splendid castle with the cupboard immediately disappeared. They were once more in the old fisherman's hut, and the man was obliged to follow his former trade and fish. But fortune would so have it that he once more drew out the golden fish. "Listen," said the fish, "if you will throw me back into the water again, I will once more give you the castle with the cupboard full of roast and boiled meats. Only be firm, for your life's sake don't reveal from whom you have it, or you will lose it all again."
"I will take good care,"
answered the fisherman, and threw the fish back into the water. Now at home everything was once more in its former magnificence, and the wife was overjoyed at their good fortune. But curiosity left her no peace, so that after a couple of days she began to ask again how it had come to pass, and how he had managed to secure it. The man kept silence for a short time, but at last she made him so angry that he broke out, and betrayed the secret. In an instant the castle disappeared, and they were back again in their old hut.
"Now you have got what you want," said he, "and we can gnaw at a bare bone again."
"Ah," said the woman, "I had rather not have riches if I am not to know from whom they come, for then I have no peace." The man went back to fish, and after a while he chanced to draw out the goldfish for a third time. "Listen," said the fish, "I see very well that I am fated to fall into your hands. Take me home and cut me into 6 pieces. Give your wife 2 of them to eat, 2 to your horse, and bury 2 of them in the ground. Then they will bring you a blessing." The fisherman took the fish home with him, and did as it had bidden him. It came to pass, however, that from the 2 pieces that were buried in the ground, 2 golden lilies sprang up, that the horse had 2 golden foals, and the fisherman's wife bore 2 children who were made entirely of gold. The children grew up, became tall and handsome, and the lilies and horses grew likewise. Then they said, "Father, we want to mount our golden steeds and travel out in the world." But he answered sorrowfully, "How shall I bear it if you go away, and I know not how it fares with you?" Then they said, "The 2 golden lilies remain here. By them you can see how it is with us. If they are fresh, then we are in health. If they are withered, we are ill. If they perish, then we are dead." So they rode forth and came to an inn, in which were many people, and when they perceived the gold children, they began to laugh and jeer. When one of them heard the mocking, he felt ashamed, and would not go out into the world, but turned back and went home again to his father. But the other rode forward and reached a great forest. As he was about to enter it, the people said, "It is not safe for you to ride through. The wood is full of robbers who would treat you badly. You will fare ill, and when they see that you are all of gold, and your horse likewise, they will assuredly kill you." But he would not allow himself to be frightened, and said, "I must and will ride through it." Then he took bearskins and covered himself and his horse with them, so that the gold was no more to be seen, and rode fearlessly into the forest. When he had ridden onward a little, he heard a rustling in the bushes, and heard voices speaking together. From one side came cries of, "There is one!" but from the other, "Let him go! 'Tis an idle fellow, as poor and bare as a church mouse. What should we gain from him?" So the gold child rode joyfully through the forest, and no evil befell him. One day he entered a village wherein he saw a maiden, who was so beautiful that he did not believe that any more beautiful than she existed in the world. And as such a mighty love took possession of him, he went up to her and said, "I love thee with my whole heart. Wilt thou be my wife?" He too pleased the maiden so much that she agreed and said, "Yes, I will be thy wife, and be true to thee my whole life long." Then they were married, and just as they were in the greatest happiness, home came the father of the bride, and when he saw that his daughter's wedding was being celebrated, he was astonished, and said, "Where is the bridegroom?" They showed him the gold child, who, however, still wore his bearskins. Then the father said wrathfully, "A vagabond shall never have my daughter," and was about to kill him. Then the bride begged as hard as she could, and said, "He is my husband, and I love him with all my heart," until at last he allowed himself to be appeased. Nevertheless, the idea never left his thoughts, so that next morning he rose early, wishing to see whether his daughter's husband was a common ragged beggar. But when he peeped in, he saw a magnificent golden man in the bed, and the cast-off bearskins lying on the ground. Then he went back and thought, "What a good thing it was that I restrained my anger. I should have committed a great crime." But the gold child dreamed that he rode out to hunt a splendid stag, and when he awoke in the morning, he said to his wife, "I must go out hunting." She was uneasy, and begged him to stay there, and said, "You might easily meet with a great misfortune." But he answered, "I must and will go." Thereupon he got up, and rode forth into the forest, and it was not long before a fine stag crossed his path exactly according to his dream. He aimed, and was about to shoot it, when the stag ran away. He gave chase over hedges and ditches for the whole day without feeling tired, but in the evening the stag vanished from his sight, and when the gold child looked around him, he was standing before a little house, wherein was a witch. He knocked, and a little old woman came out and asked, "What are you doing so late in the midst of the great forest?" "Have you not seen a stag?" "Yes," answered she, "I know the stag well." And thereupon a little dog, which had come out of the house with her, barked at the man violently. "Wilt thou be silent, thou odious toad?" said he, "or I will shoot thee dead." Then the witch cried out in a passion, "What? Will you slay my little dog?" and immediately transformed him, so that he lay like a stone, and his bride awaited him in vain, and thought, "That which I so greatly dreaded, which lay so heavily on my heart, has come upon him." But at home the other brother was standing by the gold lilies, when one of them suddenly drooped. "Good heavens!" said he, "my brother has met with some great misfortune. I must away to see if I can possibly rescue him." Then the father said, "Stay here. If I lose you also, what shall I do?" But he answered, "I must and will go forth." Then he mounted his golden horse, and rode forth and entered the great forest, where his brother lay turned to stone. The old witch came out of her house and called him, wishing to entrap him also, but he did not go near her, and said, "I will shoot you if you will not bring my brother to life again." She touched the stone, though very unwillingly, with her forefinger, and he was immediately restored to his human shape. But the two gold children rejoiced when they saw each other again, kissed, and caressed each other, and rode away together out of the forest, the one home to his bride, and the other to his father. The father then said, "I knew well that you had rescued your brother, for the golden lily suddenly rose up and blossomed out again." Then they lived happily, and all prospered with them until their death. End of story 85.
Story 86 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Evan Smith. Household Tales by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Margaret Hunt. The Fox and the Geese. The fox once came to a meadow in which was a flock of fine fat geese, on which he smiled and said, "I come in the nick of time. You are sitting together quite beautifully, so that I can eat you up one after the other." The geese cackled with terror, sprang up and began to wail and beg piteously for their lives. But the fox would listen to nothing, and said, "There is no mercy to be had. You must die." At length one of them took heart and said, "If we poor geese are to yield up our vigorous young lives, show us the only possible favor, and allow us one more prayer, that we may not die in our sins, and then we will place ourselves in a row, so that you can always pick yourself out the fattest." "Yes," said the fox, "that is reasonable and a pious request. Pray away, and I will wait till you are done." Then the first began a good long prayer, forever saying, "Ga, ga," and as she would make no end, the second did not wait until her turn came, but began also, "Ga, ga." The third and fourth followed her, and soon they were all cackling together. When they have done praying, the story shall be continued further, but at present they are still praying without stopping. End of story 86.
Story 87 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Household Tales by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Margaret Hunt. The Poor Man and the Rich Man. In olden times, when the Lord himself still used to walk about on this earth amongst men, it once happened that he was tired and overtaken by the darkness before he could reach an inn. Now there stood on the road before him two houses facing each other, the one large and beautiful, the other small and poor. The large one belonged to a rich man, and the small one to a poor man. Then the Lord thought, "I shall be no burden to the rich man. I will stay the night with him." When the rich man heard someone knocking at his door, he opened the window and asked the stranger what he wanted. The Lord answered, "I only ask for a night's lodging." Then the rich man looked at the traveler from head to foot, and as the Lord was wearing common clothes, and did not look like one who had much money in his pocket, he shook his head and said, "No, I cannot take you in. My rooms are full of herbs and seeds, and if I were to lodge everyone who knocked at my door, I might very soon go begging myself. Go somewhere else for a lodging." And with this he shut down the window and left the Lord standing there. So the Lord turned his back on the rich man, and went across to the small house and knocked. He had hardly done so when the poor man opened the little door and bade the traveler come in. "Pass the night with me. It is already dark," said he. "You cannot go any further tonight." This pleased the Lord, and he went in. The poor man's wife shook hands with him and welcomed him, and said he was to make himself at home and put up with what they had got. They had not much to offer him, but what they had they would give him with all their hearts. So she put the potatoes on the fire, and while they were boiling, she milked the goat, that they might have a little milk with them. When the cloth was laid, The Lord sat down with the man and his wife, and he enjoyed their coarse food, for there were happy faces at the table. When they had had supper, and it was bedtime, the woman called her husband apart and said, "Hark you, dear husband, let us make up a bed of straw for ourselves tonight, and then the poor traveler can sleep in our bed and have a good rest, for he has been walking the whole day through, and that makes one weary." "With all my heart," he answered, "I will go and offer it to him." And he went to the stranger and invited him, if he had no objection, to sleep in their bed and rest his limbs properly. But the Lord was unwilling to take their bed from the two old folks. However, they would not be satisfied until, at length, he did it, and lay down in their bed, while they themselves lay on some straw on the ground. Next morning they got up before daybreak and made as good a breakfast as they could for the guest. When the sun shone in through the little window, and the Lord had got up, he again ate with them, and then prepared to set out on his journey. But as he was standing at the door, he turned round and said, "As you are so kind and good, you may wish 3 things for yourselves, and I will grant them." Then the man said, "What else should I wish for but eternal happiness, and that we too, as long as we live, may be healthy, and have every day our daily bread? For the third wish I do not know what to have." And the Lord said to him, "Will you wish for a new house instead of this old one?" "Oh, yes," said the man. "If I can have that too, I should like it very much." And the Lord fulfilled his wish, and changed their old house into a new one, again gave them his blessing, and went on. The sun was high when the rich man got up and leaned out of his window, and saw on the opposite side of the way a new clean-looking house with red tiles and bright windows, where the old hut used to be. He was very much astonished, and called his wife and said to her, "Tell me, what can have happened? Last night there was a miserable little hut standing there, and today there is a beautiful new house. Run over and see how that came to pass." So his wife went and asked the poor man, and he said to her, "Yesterday evening a traveler came here and asked for a night's lodging, and this morning when he took leave of us, he granted us 3 wishes: eternal happiness, health during this life, and our daily bread as well, and besides this, a beautiful new house instead of our old hut." When the rich man's wife heard this, she ran back in haste and told her husband how it happened. The man said, "I could tear myself to pieces if I had but known that. The traveler came to our house too, and wanted to sleep here, and I sent him away." "Quick," said his wife, "get on your horse. You can still catch that man up, and then you must ask to have 3 wishes granted to you." The rich man followed the good counsel, and galloped away on his horse, and soon came up with the Lord. He spoke to him softly and pleasantly, and begged him not to take it amiss that he had not let him in directly. He was looking for the front door key, and in the meantime the stranger had gone away. If he returned the same way, he must come and stay with him. "Yes," said the Lord, "if I ever come back again, I will do so." Then the rich man asked if he might not wish for 3 things too, as his neighbor had done. "Yes," said the Lord, he might, but it would not be to his advantage, and he had better not wish for anything. But the rich man thought that he could easily ask for something which would add to his happiness, if only he knew that it would be granted. So the Lord said to him, "Ride home, then, and 3 wishes which you shall form shall be fulfilled." The rich man had now gained what he wanted, so he rode home, and began to consider what he should wish for. As he was thus thinking, he let the bridle fall, and the horse began to caper about, so that he was continually disturbed in his meditations, and could not collect his thoughts at all. He patted its neck and said, "Gently, Lisa," but the horse only began new tricks. Then at last he was angry and cried quite impatiently, "I wish your neck was broken." Directly he had said the words, down the horse fell on the ground, and there it lay dead, and never moved again. And thus was his first wish fulfilled. As he was miserly by nature, he did not like to leave the harness lying there, so he cut it off and put it on his back, and now he had to go on foot. "I still have 2 wishes left," said he, and comforted himself with that thought. And now, as he was walking slowly through the sand, and the sun was burning hot at noonday, he grew quite hot-tempered and angry. The saddle hurt his back, and he had not yet any idea what to wish for. "If I were to wish for all the riches and treasures in the world," said he to himself, "I should still to think of all kinds of other things later on. I knew that beforehand, but I will manage so that there is nothing at all left me to wish for afterwards." Then he sighed and said, "Ah, if I were but that Bavarian peasant who likewise had 3 wishes granted to him, I knew quite well what to do, and in the first place wish for a great deal of beer, and in the second for as much beer as he was able to drink, and in the third for a barrel of beer into the bargain." Many a time he thought he had found it, but then it seemed to him to be, after all, too little. Then it came into his mind what an easy life his wife had, for she stayed home in a cool room and enjoyed herself. This really did vex him, and before he was aware, he said, "I just wish she was sitting there on the saddle and could not get off it, instead of my having to drag it along on my back." And as the last word was spoken, the saddle disappeared from his back, and he saw that his second wish had been fulfilled. Then he really did feel warm. He began to run and wanted to be quite alone in his own room at home, to think of something really large for his last wish. But when he arrived there and opened the parlor door, he saw his wife sitting in the middle of the room on the saddle, crying and complaining and quite unable to get off it. So he said, "Do bear it, and I will wish for all the riches on earth for thee, only stay where thou art." She, however, called him a fool, and said, "What good will all the riches on earth do me if I am to sit on the saddle? Thou hast wished me on it, so thou must help me off." So, whether he would or not, he was forced to let his third wish be that she would be quit of the saddle and able to get off it, and immediately the wish was fulfilled. So he got nothing by it but vexation, trouble, abuse, and the loss of his horse. But the poor people lived happily, quietly, and piously until their happy death. End of story 87.
Story 88 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Melvin Lee. Household Tales by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Margaret Hunt. The Singing Springing Lark. There was once on a time a man who was about to set out on a long journey, and on parting he asked his 3 daughters what he should bring back with him for them. Whereupon the eldest wished for pearls, the second wished for diamonds, but the third said, "Dear father, I should like a singing, soaring lark." The father said, "Yes, if I can get it, you shall have it," kissed all 3, and set out. Now, when the time had come for him to be on his way home again, he had brought pearls and diamonds for the 2 eldest, but he had sought everywhere in vain for a singing, soaring lark for the youngest, and he was very unhappy about it, for she was his favorite child. Then his road lay through a forest, and in the midst of it was a splendid castle, and near the castle stood a tree, but quite on top of the tree he saw a singing, soaring lark. "Ah, you come just at the right moment," he said, quite delighted, and called to his servant to climb up and fetch the little creature. But as he approached the tree, a lion leapt from beneath it, shook himself, and roared till the leaves on the trees trembled. "He who tries to steal my singing, soaring lark," he cried, "will I devour." Then the man said, "I did not know that the bird belonged to thee. I will make amends for the wrong I have done, and ransom myself with a large sum of money. Only spare my life." The lion said, "Nothing can save thee unless thou wilt promise to give me for my own what first meets thee on thy return home. And if thou wilt do that, I will grant thee thy life, and thou shalt have the bird for thy daughter into the bargain." But the man hesitated and said, "That might be my youngest daughter. She loves me best, and always runs to meet me on my return home." The servant, however, was terrified and said, "Why should your daughter be the very one to meet you? It might as easily be a cat or a dog." Then the man allowed himself to be overpersuaded, took the singing, soaring lark, and promised to give the lion whatsoever should first meet him on his return home. When he reached home and entered his house, the first who met him was no other than his youngest and dearest daughter, who came running up, kissed and embraced him, and when she saw that he had brought with him a singing, soaring lark, she was beside herself with joy. The father, however, could not rejoice, but began to weep, and said, "My dearest child, I have bought the little bird dear. In return for it, I have been obliged to promise thee to a savage lion, and when he has thee, he will tear thee in pieces and devour thee." And he told her all, just as it had happened, and begged her not to go there, come what might. But she consoled him and said, "Dearest father, indeed your promise must be fulfilled. I will go thither and soften the lion, so that I may return to thee safely." Next morning she had the road pointed out to her, took leave, and went fearlessly out into the forest. The lion, however, was an enchanted prince, and was by day a lion, and all his people were lions with him, but in the night they resumed their natural human shapes. On her arrival she was kindly received and led into the castle. When the night came, the lion turned into a handsome man, and their wedding was celebrated with great magnificence. They lived happily together, remained awake at night, and slept in the daytime. One day he came and said, "Tomorrow there is a feast in thy father's house, because your eldest sister is to be married, and if thou art inclined to go there, my lion shall conduct thee." She said, "Yes, I should very much like to see my father again," and went thither, accompanied by the lions. There was great joy when she arrived, for they had all believed that she had been torn in pieces by the lion, and had long ceased to live. But she told them what a handsome husband she had, and how well off she was, remained with them while the wedding feast lasted, and then went back again to the forest. When the second daughter was about to be married, and she was again invited to the wedding, she said to the lion, "This time I will not be alone, thou must come with me." The lion, however, said that it was too dangerous for him, for if when their array from a burning candle fell on him, he would be changed into a dove, and for 7 years long would have to fly about with the doves. She said, "Ah, but do come with me, I will take great care of thee, and guard thee from all light." So they went away together, and took with them their little child as well. She had a chamber built there, so strong and thick that no ray could pierce through it. In this he was to shut himself up when the candles were lit for the wedding feast. But the door was made of green wood, which warped and left a little crack, which no one noticed. The wedding was celebrated with magnificence, but when the procession with all its candles and torches came back from church, and passed by this apartment, a ray about the breadth of a hair fell on the king's son, and when this ray touched him, he was transformed in an instant. And when she came in and looked for him, she did not see him, but a white dove was sitting there. The dove said to her, "For 7 years must I fly about the world, but at every 7th step that you take, I will let fall a drop of red blood and a white feather, and these will show thee the way, and if thou followest the trace, thou canst release me." Thereupon the dove flew out at the door, and she followed him, and at every 7th step a red drop of blood and a little white feather fell down and showed her the way. So she went continually further and further in the wide world, never looking about her or resting, and the 7 years were almost past. Then she rejoiced and thought that they would soon be delivered, and yet they were so far from it. Once when they were thus moving onwards, no little feather and no drop of red blood fell, and when she raised her eyes, the dove had disappeared, and as she thought to herself, "In this no man can help thee," she climbed up to the sun and said to him, "Thou shinest into every crevice, and over every peak. Hast thou not seen a white dove flying?" "No," said the sun, "I have seen none, but I present thee with a casket. Open it when thou art in sorest need." Then she thanked the sun, and went on until evening came, and the moon appeared. She then asked her, "Thou shinest the whole night through on every field and every forest. Hast thou not seen a white dove flying?" "No," said the moon, "I have seen no dove, but here I give thee an egg. Break it when thou art in great need." She thanked the moon, and went on until the night wind came up and blew on her. Then she said to it, "Thou blowest over every tree and under every leaf. Hast thou not seen a white dove flying?" "No," said the night wind, "I have seen none, but I will ask the 3 other winds, perhaps they have seen it." The east wind and the west wind came, and had seen nothing, but the south wind said, "I have seen the white dove. It has flown to the Red Sea, where it has become a lion again, for the 7 years are over, and the lion is there fighting with a dragon. The dragon, however, is an enchanted princess." The night wind then said to her, "I will advise thee. Go to the Red Sea. On the right bank are some tall reeds. Count them, break off the 11th, and strike the dragon with it. Then the lion will be able to subdue it, and both then will regain their human form. After that, look around, and thou wilt see the griffin, which is by the Red Sea. Swing thyself with thy beloved onto his back, and the bird will carry you over the sea to your own home. Here is a nut for thee. When thou art above the center of the sea, let the nut fall. It will immediately shoot up, and a tall nut tree will grow out of the water, on which the griffin may rest. For if he cannot rest, he will not be strong enough to carry you across. And if thou forgettest to throw down the nut, he will let you fall into the sea." Then she went thither, and found everything as the night wind had said. She counted the reeds by the sea, and cut off the 11, struck the dragon therewith, whereupon the lion overcame it, and immediately both of them regained their human shapes. But when the princess, who had before been the dragon, was delivered from enchantment, she took the youth by the arm, seated herself on the griffin, and carried him off with her. There stood the poor maiden, who had wandered so far, and was again forsaken. She sat down and cried, but at last she took courage and said, "Still I will go as far as the wind blows, and as long as the cock crows, until I find him." And she went forth by long, long roads, until at last she came to the castle, where both of them were living together. There she heard that soon a feast was to be held, in which they would celebrate their wedding. But she said, "God still helps me," and opened the casket that the sun had given her. A dress lay therein as brilliant as the sun itself. So she took it out and put it on, and went up into the castle, and everyone, even the bride herself, looked at her with astonishment. The dress pleased the bride so well that she thought it might do for her wedding dress, and asked if it was for sale. "Not for money or land," answered she, "but for flesh and blood." The bride asked her what she meant by that, so she said, "Let me sleep a night in the chamber where the bridegroom sleeps." The bride would not, yet wanted very much to have the dress. At last she consented, but the page was to give the prince a sleeping draught. When it was night, therefore, and the youth was already asleep, she was led into the chamber. She seated herself on the bed and said, I have followed after thee for 7 years. I have been to the sun and the moon, and the 4 winds, and have inquired for thee, and have helped thee against the dragon. Wilt thou then quite forget me? But the prince slept so soundly that it only seemed to him as if the wind were whistling outside in the fir trees. When therefore day broke, she was led out again, and had to give up the golden dress. And as that even had been of no avail, she was sad, went out into a meadow, sat down there and wept. While she was sitting there, she thought of the egg which the moon had given her. She opened it, and there came out a clucking hen with 12 chickens, all of gold. They ran about chirping, and crept again under the old hen's wings. Nothing more beautiful was ever seen in the world. Then she arose, and drove them through the meadow before her, until the bride looked out of the window. The little chickens pleased her so much that she immediately came down and asked if they were for sale, not for money or land, but for flesh and blood. Let me sleep another night in the chamber where the bridegroom sleeps. The bride said, yes, intending to cheat her as on the former evening. But when the prince went to bed, he asked the page what the murmuring and rustling in the night had been. On this the page told all, that he had been forced to give him a sleeping draught, because a poor girl had slept secretly in the chamber, and that he was to give him another that night. The prince said, pour out the draught by the bedside. At night she was again led in, and when she began to relate how ill all had fared with her, he immediately recognized his beloved wife by her voice, sprang up and cried, now I really am released. I have been as it were in a dream, for the strange princess has bewitched me so that I have been compelled to forget thee. But God has delivered me from the spell at the right time. Then they both left the castle secretly in the night, for they feared the father of the princess, who was a sorcerer, and they seated themselves on the griffin which bore them across the Red Sea, and when they were in the midst of it, she let fall the nut. Immediately a tall nut tree grew up, whereon the bird rested, and then carried them home, where they found their child, who had grown tall and beautiful, and they lived thenceforth happily until their death. End of story 88.
Story 89 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jennifer Fournier, Centerville, Virginia, USA. Household Tales by Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Margaret Hunt. The Goose Girl. There was, once upon a time, an old queen whose husband had been dead for many years, and she had a beautiful daughter. When the princess grew up, she was betrothed to a prince who lived at a great distance. When the time came for her to be married, and she had to journey forth into the distant kingdom, the aged queen packed up for her many costly vessels of silver and gold, and trinkets also of gold and silver, and cups and jewels, in short, everything which appertained to a royal dowry, for she loved her child with all her heart. She likewise sent her maid-in-waiting, who was to ride with her and hand her over to the bridegroom, and each had a horse for the journey, but the horse of the king's daughter was called Falada, and could speak. So when the hour of parting had come, the aged mother went into her bedroom, took a small knife, and cut her finger with it until it bled. Then she held a white handkerchief to it, into which she let 3 drops of blood fall, gave it to her daughter, and said, "Dear child, preserve this carefully. It will be of service to you on your way." So they took a sorrowful leave of each other. The princess put the piece of cloth in her bosom, mounted her horse, and then went away to her bridegroom. After she had ridden for a while, she felt a burning thirst, and said to her waiting-maid, "Dismount, and take my cup, which thou hast brought with thee for me, and get me some water from the stream, for I should like to drink." "If you are thirsty," said the waiting-maid, "get off your horse yourself, and lie down and drink out of the water. I don't choose to be your servant." So in her great thirst the princess alighted, bent down over the water in the stream and drank, and was not allowed to drink out of the golden cup. Then she said, "Ah, heaven!" And the 3 drops of blood answered, "If thy mother knew, her heart would break." But the king's daughter was humble, said nothing, and mounted her horse again. She rode some miles further, but the day was warm, the sun scorched her, and she was thirsty once more. And when they came to a stream of water, she again cried to her waiting-maid, "Dismount, and give me some water in my golden cup," for she had long ago forgotten the girl's ill words. But the waiting-maid said still more haughtily, "If you wish to drink, drink as you can. I don't choose to be your maid." Then, in her great thirst, the king's daughter alighted, bent over the flowing stream, wept, and said, "Ah, heaven!" And the drops of blood again replied, "If thy mother knew this, her heart would break." And as she was thus drinking and leaning right over the stream, the handkerchief with the 3 drops of blood fell out of her bosom, and floated away with the water, without her observing it, so great was her trouble. The waiting-maid, however, had seen it, and she rejoiced to think that she had now power over the bride. For since the princess had lost the drops of blood, she had become weak and powerless. So now, when she wanted to mount her horse again, the one that was called Falada, the waiting-maid said, "Falada is more suitable for me, and my nag will do for thee." And the princess had to be content with that. Then the waiting-maid, with many hard words, bade the princess exchange her royal apparel for her own shabby clothes, and at length she was compelled to swear by the clear sky above her that she would not say one word of this to anyone at the royal court, and if she had not taken this oath, she would have been killed on the spot. But Falada saw all this, and observed it well. The waiting-maid now mounted Falada, and the true bride the bad horse, and thus they travelled onwards, until at length they entered the royal palace. There were great rejoicings over her arrival, and the prince sprang forward to meet her, lifted the waiting-maid from her horse, and thought she was his consort. She was conducted upstairs, but the real princess was left standing below. Then the old king looked out of the window, and saw her standing in the courtyard, and how dainty and delicate and beautiful she was, and instantly went to the royal apartment and asked the bride about the girl she had with her, who was standing down below in the courtyard, and who she was. "I picked her up on my way for a companion. Give the girl something to work at, that she may not stand idle." But the old king had no work for her, and knew of none, so he said, "I have a little boy who tends the geese. She may help him." The boy was called Conrad, and the true bride had to help him to tend the geese. Soon afterwards the false bride said to the young king, "Dearest husband, I beg you do me a favor." He answered, "I will do so most willingly." "Then send for the knacker, and have the head of the horse on which I rode here cut off, for it vexed me on the way." In reality, she was afraid that the horse might tell how she had behaved to the king's daughter. Then she succeeded in making the king promise that it should be done, and the faithful Falada was to die. This came to the ears of the real princess, and she secretly promised to pay the knacker a piece of gold if he would perform a small service for her. There was a great dark-looking gateway in the town, through which morning and evening she had to pass with the geese. Would he be so good as to nail up Falada's head on it, so that she might see him again more than once? The knacker's man promised to do that, and cut off the head and nailed it fast beneath the dark gateway. Early in the morning, when she and Conrad drove out their flock beneath this gateway, she said in passing, "Alas, Falada, hanging there?" Then the head answered, "Alas, young queen, how ill you fare! If this your tender mother knew, her heart would surely break in two." Then they went still further out of the town, and drove their geese into the country. And when they had come to the meadow, she sat down and unbound her hair, which was like pure gold, and Conrad saw it and delighted in its brightness, and wanted to pluck out a few hairs. Then she said, "Blow, blow, thou gentle wind, I say, blow Conrad's little hat away, and make him chase it here and there until I have braided all my hair and bound it up again." And there came such a violent wind that it blew Conrad's hat far away across country, and he was forced to run after it. When he came back, she had finished combing her hair and was putting it up again, and he could not get any of it. Then Conrad was angry and would not speak to her, and thus they watched the geese until the evening, and then they went home. Next day, when they were driving the geese out through the dark gateway, the maiden said, "Alas, Falada, hanging there?" Falada answered, "Alas, young queen, how ill you fare! If this your tender mother knew, her heart would surely break in two." And she sat down again in the field and began to comb out her hair, and Conrad ran and tried to clutch it. So she said in haste, "Blow, blow, thou gentle wind, I say, blow Conrad's little hat away, and make him chase it here and there until I have braided all my hair and bound it up again." Then the wind blew and blew his little hat off his head and far away, and Conrad was forced to run after it. And when he came back, her hair had been put up a long time, and he could get none of it. And so they looked after their geese till evening came. But in the evening, after they got home, Conrad went to the old king and said, "I won't tend the geese with that girl any longer." "Why not?" inquired the aged king. "Oh, because she vexes me the whole day long." Then the aged king commanded him to relate what it was that she did to him. And Conrad said, "In the morning, when we pass beneath the dark gateway with the flock, there is a sorry horse's head on the wall, and she says to it, 'Alas, Falada, hanging there!' And the head replies, 'Alas, young queen, how ill you fare! If this your tender mother knew, her heart would surely break in two.'" And Conrad went on to relate what happened on the goose pasture, and how, when there, he had to chase his hat. The aged king commanded him to drive his flock out again next day, and as soon as morning came, he placed himself behind the dark gateway, and heard how the maiden spoke to the head of Falada. And then he too went into the country, and hid himself in the thicket in the meadow. There he soon saw with his own eyes the goose girl and the goose boy bringing their flock, and how after a while she sat down and unplaited her hair, which shone with radiance. And soon she said, "Blow, blow, thou gentle wind, I say, blow Conrad's little hat away, and make him chase it here and there until I have braided all my hair and bound it up again." Then came a blast of wind and carried off Conrad's hat, so that he had to run far away, while the maiden quietly went on combing and plaiting her hair, all of which the king observed. Then, quite unseen, he went away, and when the goose girl came home in the evening, he called her aside and asked why she did all these things. "I may not tell you that, and I dare not lament my sorrows to any human being, for I have sworn not to do so by the heaven which is above me. If I had not done that, I should have lost my life." He urged her and left her no peace, but he could draw nothing from her. Then he said, "If thou wilt not tell me anything, tell thy sorrows to the iron stove there." And he went away. Then she crept into the iron stove, and began to weep and lament, and emptied her whole heart, and said, "Here am I, deserted by the whole world, and yet I am a king's daughter, and a false waiting-maid has by force brought me to such a pass that I have been compelled to put off my royal apparel, and she has taken my place with my bridegroom, and I have to perform menial service as a goose-girl. If my mother did but know that, her heart would break." The aged king, however, was standing outside by the pipe of the stove, and was listening to what she said, and heard it. Then he came back again, and bade her come out of the stove, and royal garments were placed on her, and it was marvellous how beautiful she was. The aged king summoned his son, and revealed to him that he had got the false bride, who was only a waiting-maid, but that the true one was standing there, as the sometime goose-girl. The young king rejoiced with all his heart when he saw her beauty and youth, and a great feast was made ready, to which all the people and all good friends were invited. At the head of the table sat the bridegroom with the king's daughter on one side of him, and the waiting-maid on the other. But the waiting-maid was blinded, and did not recognize the princess in her dazzling array. When they had eaten and drunk and were merry, the aged king asked the waiting-maid as a riddle what a person deserved who had behaved in such and such a way to her master, and at the same time related the whole story, and asked what sentence such a one merited. Then the false bride said, "She deserves no better fate than to be stripped entirely naked, and put in a barrel which is studded inside with pointed nails, and 2 white horses should be harnessed to it, which will drag her along through one street after another till she is dead." "It is thou," said the aged king, "and thou hast pronounced thine own sentence, and thus shall it be done unto thee." And when the sentence had been carried out, the young king married his true bride, and both of them reigned over their kingdom in peace and happiness. End of 89.
Story 90 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Kurt from Tucson, Arizona. Household Tales by Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm, and translated by Margaret Hunt. The Young Giant. Once on a time, a countryman had a son who was as big as a thumb, and did not become any bigger, and during several years did not grow 1 hair's breadth. Once when the father was going out to plow, the little one said, "Father, I will go out with you." "Thou wouldst go out with me?" said the father. "Stay here, thou wilt be of no use out there, besides thou mightest get lost." Then Thumbling began to cry, and for the sake of peace his father put him in his pocket and took him with him. When he was outside in the field, he took him out again and set him in a freshly cut furrow. Whilst he was there, a great giant came over the hill. "Do thou see that great bogey?" said the father, for he wanted to frighten the little fellow to make him good. "He is coming to fetch thee." The giant, however, had scarcely taken 2 steps with his long legs before he was in the furrow. He took up little Thumbling, carefully with 2 fingers, examined him, and without saying 1 word, went away with him. His father stood by, but could not utter a sound for terror, and he thought nothing else but that his child was lost, and that as long as he lived he should never set eyes on him again. The giant, however, carried him home, suckled him, and Thumbling grew and became tall and strong after the manner of giants. When 2 years had passed, the old giant took him into the forest, wanted to try him, and said, "Pull up a stick for thyself." Then the boy was already so strong that he tore up a young tree out of the earth by the roots. But the giant thought, "We must do better than that," took him back again, and suckled him 2 years longer. When he tried him, his strength had increased so much that he could tear an old tree out of the ground. That was still not enough for the giant. He again suckled him for 2 years, and when he then went with him into the forest and said, "Now just tear up a proper stick for me," the boy tore up the strongest oak tree from the earth, so that it split, and that was a mere trifle to him. "Now that will do," said the giant, "thou art perfect," and took him back to the field from whence he had brought him. His father was there following the plough. The young giant went up to him and said, "Does my father see what a fine man his son has grown into?" The farmer was alarmed and said, "No, thou art not my son. I don't want thee. Leave me." "Truly I am your son. Allow me to do your work. I can plough as well as you, nay, better." "No, no, thou art not my son, and thou canst not plough. Go away." However, as he was afraid of this great man, he left go of the plough, stepped back, and stood at one side of the piece of land. Then the youth took the plough, and just pressed it with one hand, but his grasp was so strong that the plough went deep into the earth. The farmer could not bear to see that, and called to him, "If thou art determined to plough, thou must not press so hard on it. That makes bad work." The youth, however, unharnessed the horses, and drew the plough himself, saying, "Just go home, father, and bid my mother make ready a large dish of food, and in the meantime I will go over the field." Then the farmer went home and ordered his wife to prepare the food. But the youth ploughed the field, which was 2 acres large, quite alone, and then he harnessed himself to the harrow and harrowed the whole of the land, using 2 harrows at once. When he had done it, he went into the forest and pulled up 2 oak trees, laid them across his shoulders, and hung on them 1 harrow behind and 1 before, and also 1 horse behind and 1 before, and carried all as if it had been a bundle of straw to his parents' house. When he entered the yard, his mother did not recognize him, and asked, "Who is that horrible tall man?" The farmer said, "That is our son." She said, "No, that cannot be our son. We never had such a tall one. Ours was a little thing." She called to him, "Go away, we do not want thee." The youth was silent, but led his horses to the stable, gave them some oats and hay, and all that they wanted. When he had done this, he went into the parlor, sat down on the bench, and said, "Mother, now I should like something to eat. Will it soon be ready?" Then she said, "Yes," and brought in 2 immense dishes full of food, which would have been enough to satisfy herself and her husband for a week. The youth, however, ate the whole of it himself, and asked if she had nothing more to set before him. "No," she replied, "that is all we have. But that was only a taste. I must have more." She did not dare to oppose him, and went and put a huge cauldron full of food on the fire, and when it was ready, carried it in. "At length come a few crumbs," said he, and ate all there was, but it was still not sufficient to appease his hunger. Then said he, "Father, I see well that with you I shall never have food enough. If you will get me an iron staff which is strong, and which I cannot break against my knees, I will go out into the world." The farmer was glad, put his 2 horses in his cart, and fetched from the smith a staff so large and thick that the 2 horses could only just bring it away. The youth laid it across his knees, and snap he broke it in 2 in the middle like a beanstalk, and threw it away. The father then harnessed 4 horses, and brought a bar which was so long and thick that the 4 horses could only just drag it. The son snapped this also in twain against his knees, threw it away, and said, "Father, this can be of no use to me. You must harness more horses, and bring a stronger staff." So the father harnessed 8 horses, and brought one which was so long and thick that the 8 horses could only just carry it. When the son took it in his hand, he broke off a bit from the top of it also, and said, "Father, I see that you will not be able to procure me any such staff as I want. I will remain no longer with you." So he went away, and gave out that he was a smith's apprentice. He arrived at a village wherein lived a smith who was a greedy fellow, who never did a kindness to anyone, but wanted everything for himself. The youth went into the smithy, and asked if he needed a journeyman. "Yes," said the smith, and looked at him and thought, "That is a strong fellow who will strike out well and earn his bread." So he asked, "How much wages dost thou want?" "I don't want any at all," he replied, "only every fortnight, when the other journeymen are paid, I will give thee 2 blows, and thou must bear them." The miser was heartily satisfied, and thought he would thus save much money. Next morning the strange journeyman was to begin to work, but when the master brought the glowing bar, and the youth struck his first blow, the iron flew asunder, and the anvil sank so deep into the earth that there was no bringing it out again. Then the miser grew angry, and said, "Oh, but I can't make any use of you, you strike far too powerfully. What will you have for the 1 blow?" Then said he, "I will only give you quite a small blow, that's all." And he raised his foot and gave him such a kick that he flew away over 4 loads of hay. Then he sought out the thickest iron bar in the smithy for himself, took it as a stick in his hands, and went onwards. When he had walked for some time, he came to a small farm, and asked the bailiff if he did not require a head servant. "Yes," said the bailiff, "I can make use of one. You look a strong fellow who can do something. How much a year do you want as wages?" He again replied that he wanted no wages at all, but that every year he would give him 3 blows, which he must bear. Then the bailiff was satisfied, for he too was a covetous fellow. Next morning all the servants were to go into the wood, and the others were already up, but the head servant was still in bed. Then one of them called to him, "Get up, it is time, we are going into the wood, and thou must go with us." "Ah," said he quite roughly and surlily, "you may just go then, I shall be back again before any of you." Then the others went to the bailiff, and told him that the head man was still lying in bed, and would not go into the wood with them. The bailiff said they were to awaken him again, and tell him to harness the horses. The head man, however, said as before, "Just go there, I shall be back again before any of you." And then he stayed in bed 2 hours longer. At length he arose from the feathers, but first he got himself 2 bushels of peas from the loft, made himself some broth with them, ate it at his leisure, and when that was done, went and harnessed the horses, and drove into the wood. Not far from the wood was a ravine through which he had to pass, so he first drove the horses on, and then stopped them, and went behind the cart, took trees and brushwood, and made a great barricade, so that no horse could get through. When he was entering the wood, the others were just driving out of it with their loaded carts to go home. Then said he to them, "Drive on, I will still get home before you do." He did not drive far into the wood, but at once tore 2 of the very largest trees of all out of the earth, threw them on his cart, and turned round. When he came to the barricade, the others were still standing there, not able to get through. "Don't you see," said he, "that if you had stayed with me, you would have got home just as quickly, and would have had another hour's sleep?" He now wanted to drive on, but his horses could not work their way through, so he unharnessed them, laid them on top of the cart, took the shafts in his own hands, and pulled it all through, and he did this just as easily as if it had been laden with feathers. When he was over, he said to the others, "There, you see, I have got over quicker than you," and drove on, and the others had to stay where they were. In the yard, however, he took a tree in his hand, showed it to the bailiff, and said, "Isn't that a fine bundle of wood?" Then said the bailiff to his wife, "The servant is a good one. If he does sleep long, he is still home before the others." So he served the bailiff for a year, and when that was over, and the other servants were getting their wages, he said it was time for him to take his too. The bailiff, however, was afraid of the blows which he was to receive, and earnestly entreated him to excuse him from having them, for rather than that, he himself would be head servant, and the youth should be bailiff. "No," said he, "I will not be a bailiff. I am a head servant, and will remain so, but I will administer that which we agreed on." The bailiff was willing to give him whatsoever he demanded, but it was of no use. The head servant said no to everything. Then the bailiff did not know what to do, and begged for a fortnight's delay, for he wanted to find some way of escape. The head servant consented to this delay. The bailiff summoned all his clerks together, and they were to think the matter over and give him advice. The clerks pondered for a long time, but at last they said that no one was sure of his life with the head servant, for he could kill a man as easily as a midge, and that the bailiff ought to make him get into the well and clean it, and when he was down below they would roll up one of the millstones which was lying there and throw it on his head, and then he would never return to daylight. The advice pleased the bailiff, and the head servant was quite willing to go down the well. When he was standing down below at the bottom, they rolled down the largest millstone, and thought they had broken his skull. But he cried, "Chase away those hens from the well, they are scratching in the sand up there, and throwing the grains into my eyes so that I can't see." So the bailiff cried, "Shh, shh," and pretended to frighten the hens away. When the head servant had finished his work, he climbed up and said, "Just look what a beautiful necktie I have on." And behold, it was the millstone which he was wearing round his neck. The head servant now wanted to take his reward, but the bailiff again begged for a fortnight's delay. The clerks met together and advised him to send the head servant to the haunted mill to grind corn by night, for from thence as yet no man had ever returned in the morning alive. The proposal pleased the bailiff. He called the head servant that very evening, and ordered him to take 8 bushels of corn to the mill and grind it that night, for it was wanted. So the head servant went to the loft, and put 2 bushels in his right pocket, and 2 in his left, and took 4 in a wallet, half on his back and half on his breast, and thus laden went to the haunted mill. The miller told him that he could grind there very well by day, but not by night, for the mill was haunted, and that up to the present time whosoever had gone into it at night had been found in the morning lying dead inside. He said, "I will manage it, just you go away to bed." Then he went to the mill and poured out the corn. About 11 o'clock he went into the miller's room and sat down on the bench. When he had sat there a while, a door suddenly opened, and a large table came in, and on the table wine and roasted meats placed themselves, and much good food besides, but everything came of itself, for no one was there to carry it. After this the chairs pushed themselves up, but no people came, until all at once he beheld fingers, which handled knives and forks, and laid food on the plates, but with this exception he saw nothing. As he was hungry and saw the food, he too placed himself at the table, ate with those who were eating, and enjoyed it. When he had had enough, and the others also had quite emptied their dishes, he distinctly heard all the candles being suddenly snuffed out, and as it was now pitch dark, he felt something like a box on the ear. Then he said, "If anything of that kind comes again, I shall strike out in return." And when he had received a second box on the ear, he too struck out, and so it continued the whole night. He took nothing without returning it, but repaid everything with interest, and did not lay about him in vain. At daybreak, however, everything ceased. When the miller had got up, he wanted to look after him, and wondered if he were still alive. Then the youth said, "I have eaten my fill, have received some boxes on the ears, but I have given some in return." The miller rejoiced, and said that the mill was now released from the spell, and wanted to give him much money as a reward. But he said, "Money I will not have, I have enough of it." So he took his meal on his back, went home, and told the bailiff that he had done what he had been told to do, and would now have the reward agreed on. When the bailiff heard that, he was seriously alarmed, and quite beside himself. He walked backwards and forwards in the room, and drops of perspiration ran down from his forehead. Then he opened the window to get some fresh air, but before he was aware, the head servant had given him such a kick that he flew through the window out into the air, and so far away that no one ever saw him again. Then said the head servant to the bailiff's wife, "If he does not come back, you must take the other blow." She cried, "No, no, I cannot bear it," and opened the other window, because drops of perspiration were running down her forehead. Then he gave her such a kick that she too flew out, and as she was lighter, she went much higher than her husband. Her husband cried, "Do come to me," but she replied, "Come thou to me, I cannot come to thee." And they hovered about there in the air, and could not get to each other, and whether they are still hovering about or not, I do not know. But the young giant took up his iron bar, and went on his way. End of Story 90.